What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video from Byerly Studios. This is the longest format video that I have put out on my YouTube channel. This entire video lasts probably about an hour and a half, so of course I will include timestamps in the bottom description so you can kind of come back if you're unable to watch it all and jump around and see the parts that you'd like to see. This project was began before my YouTube channel was even established, so I did not get all of the sculpt work that I had done to this tumbler on video. Do apologize for that, but I did pick up this project months after I finished the sculpt work to go ahead and detail paint everything so I can get this project knocked out. You're just gonna see me detail painting all of the tiny nooks and crannies that I had carved into the Sculpty Clay. Everything gets hand painted, even this glow in the dark face right here. So enjoy the show, sit back, and if you need to come back and watch other portions of the video at later times due to how long the video is, please do so. Everything in this video is around 300 to 350 times speed, so I do move quite fast here. And as far as colors, I'm using your very basic colors that you can get straight from the tube at Michael's. So sit back and enjoy the show. Alright, so I'm starting this video off by base coating black around the teeth, the nostrils, the eye sockets, and inside the ears, where the colors tend to be the most dark. Not necessary on the eye sockets, but I did anyway since I had the paint out. That way I can kind of keep them as a blank slate so that I can come back after I get some of the other colors done and decide on what color I want the eyes to be. I don't want them to be all black. I don't want it to look like a demon from Supernatural or something like that. I want it to have some humanality to it. So as far as the skin tone, I am using burnt sienna and titanium white, mixing in small quantities. That way I can vary the tone around the eyebrows and around the nose to create different tones as I work my way down the face. I'll come back after this with burnt umber and some other darker colors to apply tones to it, as well as a light titanium dry brush to get kind of the details of the clay to come forward. This is a really satisfying process to watch in time lapse here. So we'll sit back and enjoy until we get to the next section. So here, when I apply the paint to the cheek, you can see how much I'm watering it down, just so that the paint can kind of lay almost like a glaze in all of the nooks and crannies as it needs to. The paint and the water will really do the work for you. as long as you're willing to put in the base layers and build up those color tones, the paint will really do the work for you. And then when you come back after and apply any kind of dry brushing, it really adds dimension to just your basic painting. So going around the edge of the ear here, I really like this shape when I sculpted it. It's just a fun vampire kind of look to it. And just the cartilage inside the ear looks pretty cool. I'm applying some burnt umber here inside the grooves of the ear, just to add some shadow and some shade. And then when I come back with that white titanium dry brush around the top of the ear there, it almost makes it look like it has a sun glare on it. So it's just applying those shades in the right places just to give it dimension. And then the eye will do the work when it looks at it. So I come back after for the second layer, and I do apply a little bit more wash to the skin, and I bring that tone up a little bit towards a light tan. Then I apply a nice titanium white dry brush, and it kind of pales out the chin and around the cheeks, bringing some of that clay texture forward. I did carve some cuts into his lips, whether he got into a fight or just naturally happens from stretching of the mouth to use those big chompers he has. I'm gonna base coat the grooves of those scars and slices with black paint, and that will allow me to apply less red, and it will darken the red that I do lay down. So this is also a way for me just to get an idea of how I kind of want those colors to look, how I want the paint to look when I get those in there around the mouth. And then I'll start working on the actual gums, the lips, and the teeth. So I'm just adding a little extra black acrylics around the teeth just to frame them in. And then I'm going to go over the teeth themselves with a cadmium yellow medium hue, which is somewhat transparent, and it's just going to add just a yellow hue to the white of the clay. And then I'll begin to build my base layers on top of this. I want the teeth to look kind of sharp, grungy, kind of dirty, decayed looking a little bit, but I still want them to look kind of uniform and pretty cool. So after applying the yellow hue to the teeth, I'm going to let that dry so I can build up some more layers. And in the meantime, I'm going to apply some blood to the cuts along the lips. I just couldn't resist using some red paint here. So I use different reds depending on how old I want the blood to look, and then sometimes I'll use lighter colored reds to highlight after everything else is done. So most of the red that you're going to see me use for all of the base of the blood is permanent alizarin crimson, which is a much darker red compared to a cadmium red, which I'll generally use for fresh blood, newly oozing blood, things like that. Or if I want to just give it some quick highlights, I will use that crimson red. This is where I'm going to apply titanium white with a little bit of yellow ochre and some more yellow cadmium yellow hue to apply some layers to the teeth so that I get the buildup that I want as far as different layers kind of blended together. I don't want them to be one solid color. I just don't think that brings any realism to it, and I want them to kind of look cankered or yellow so that it looks like they're slightly decayed. I think that yellow ochre really brings that together. As I work through the mouth here, you'll also see that I'll use the same red to apply some blood to the gums, blood to the teeth, and then I'll come back after all of this is dry and apply a light black wash to where the teeth meet the gum, just to give some shade. Alright, so next I'm going to go ahead and apply the skin tone around the skin, which would simulate where the neck would be. This is wrapped around a 20-ounce curved tumbler, so although the neck is a little bit thicker than what it would be normally on a head, the overall shading, I think, really establishes a good illusion. And it is a decapitated head, so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You know, heads when decapitated, I guess, would be different shapes and sizes. So this right here is where I'm blocking in where some neck muscles will be. Just like I did with the teeth, the nostrils, and the eyes, I'm just blocking in with standard black paint just to cover up the stainless metal below it. Same around where the bottom of the chin is going to be. This is going to be some neck muscles. And I'm just tucking that black paint in where the skin will kind of overlap those muscles. So now I'm going to go ahead and block in where the wooden stake will come up, kind of visible on the back of the neck. You're going to see this from the bottom of the tumbler will be the end of the stake. So I was going to go in and individually apply a black wash to each line that I had scribed into the clay before baking, but I decided to go ahead and just jump into it, and I did a thick black wash over the entire stake. And I'm trying to merge this up into the underlying hair, which will kind of go over it. So I'm going to build up browns using burnt umber and raw sienna mixed with a little bit of titanium white just to build up the layers to apply a wood texture to it. I'm applying my brush kind of horizontally so that I don't fill in the black grooves from the wash, but I'm still trying to apply enough paint to get that wood effect. And I'm just going to highlight it enough to give it some variation and make it look like a wood grain. So here's those tones coming up a bit to a lighter brown, and that's really where the wood starts to actually look like legitimate wood when I add a little bit of that titanium white and bring those highlights up. And once I add the white and it brings that tone up a bit, I can always come back with a little bit of burnt sienna and just add a little bit of a lighter brown to those white sections, and it just applies a little bit more wood texture to it. See, there I am actually using the paint from the cap of the paint tube. And that's just raw sienna. And of course I couldn't resist applying a little bit of blood. So I'm trying to make it to where the blood is just kind of highlighting the wood. You'll see a little bit of the blood dripping off of the bottom skin where it overlaps the wooden stake. And I'll come back later on and I'll give it a little bit more of a flesh tone over the edges of the red so that the skin looks like it's just peeled over the wooden stake. And I do that around the chin and the side of the neck as well, as some final details. Alright, so next is the torn scalp top of the tumbler. I just wanted to make a rippled skin effect at the top. Obviously I'm going to have a twisted lid on top, so it's going to be a pretty thick lid, but I just wanted to have something fun at the top. so that it didn't feel so disjointed just ending at the top of the tumbler. So it's as if the top of the skull is just kind of cut off there, and the skin's kind of been rippled back. I'm applying raw sienna. Raw sienna around the top of the tumbler here, and I'm using raw umber to give some highlights below the skin, some shadow. And I do this all around the grooves where the skin is peeled to give highlights inside the peeled skin as well. And then I will go in with a little bit of a black wash before applying my my dark reds to those grooves in a wash so that the blood settles in the low spots. And by applying a little bit of blood wash before I apply thick blood paint, it gives me an idea of where that thicker paint would settle in these grooves. I do have a video of how I sculpted this. It's a pretty quick 15-minute video, I believe, and it is on my YouTube channel. I will link it at the very end of this video if you want to check that out. Again, I didn't get a whole lot of the sculpt work on video. Sorry about that, but this is really where the fun is, at painting the tumbler. So there I am, just applying some dark shadows under those peeled skin effects. And you'll see me apply the red here in a moment before I go into the raw umber wash that I apply all over the hair. I'll get to that in just a few minutes. Alright, so here I am applying some of that red paint. As you can see, when I sculpted this, I did do a torn skin effect at the top, so I just want to make sure that I layer on the paint below that skin lip that got torn before it blends into the hair. And I'll come back here in a little while after I get the hair done, and I'll do a drip blood effect down the side of the scalp and along the hairline. So I'm just going to apply quite a few layers here to build them up. And then towards the end of the build, I may come back and apply a little bit of a crimson red to give some highlights to this blood where it would be a little brighter where it peeks over the edges of the skin. Alright, so this is by far the largest part of this build. This is applying a thick burnt umber wash to the hair. So when I detailed the hair during sculpting, I left a lot of lines, and all this wash is going to sink down into the lines, not only on the top of the hair follicles, but it's also going to get down in the grooves behind the hair along the actual scalp. So I have a lot of layers of hair here, hair here, where I want those to build up. So I'll probably do 1 to 2 layers of wash here to get the brown effect that I want, and then I will come back with a dark black wash to go between the hair lines to apply shadow to those deep crevices and give variation. Then I will come back after everything is dry and I will give it a thick black dry brush to give those top follicles some black highlights to darken the hair all around, so that it will have a brown base wash, but it will be overall dark and black. I want them to have very dark hair, and by using these dark colors in layers, I can really build up where I want the hair to begin at the top and end at the bottom along the scalp lines. So enjoy this part of the video. I go along the back side, work around to the left ear, and then top, and then work around to the front. So this is the longest part of this video. Enjoy, and then we'll get to the next section in a little bit. Alright, so here's that black wash that I spoke of to apply shadows in between the hair follicles, as it were, or the clumps of hair. So it's just going to apply shadow to the right places just to give variation, to give it more realism. So that way it's just not all one solid color, which even with the varying layers of clay just won't look good. So this is going to apply variation in the hair. As soon as I get done with this speed clip here of applying the black wash, I immediately go into a thick black dry rub in a horizontal fashion, so that way I don't fill in any of those details that I sculpted into the clay. So a dry brush technique is going to be used just to apply darkness, and you're going to see that hair really take on a dark effect over the next few clips here. So same thing around the front of the tumbler. This time though, I did have to be very detailed about where I laid the colors. I don't want to darken the forehead too much. You'll see some areas where I do have to use a clean wet brush to soak up some of the wash when it applied too much to the forehead. I don't mind a little bit of wash hitting the forehead and darkening it. I just don't want it to look out of place with the dark hair being on the light forehead. Some shadow is okay, I just don't want it to be messy in a way that I don't mean it to be. So I'm going to do the same technique around the front of the hair here, and it really kind of frames in the face and brings it to life, so I can apply some of the other little details. So using the wash to darken the hair here, I apply a little bit of that to the forehead to darken it in the shadows of the hair. I apply too much water. I don't want that water to sit there, so I actually rinse out my brush, dry it off, and then I'll use the dried brush to absorb some of that water. I actually do that 2 or 3 times along the interior of the hair, along the forehead, just to darken it a little bit at a time, just to create some variation between the skin around the face and the skin along the forehead where that dark hair would be casting shadows. So you can easily just soak up any kind of wash you need by just rinsing out your brush, drying it off thoroughly, and then just gently laying the brush on the item and letting it soak up whatever water is there. It will leave some of that color behind, but I don't want it to have watermarks. Alright, so here's that light black wash between the clumps of hair just to give it some shade and shadow. I'm just going to apply a little bit of this just to give it some variation before I let it fully dry, and then do a dry brush black over this just like I did the back. And then the hair is almost complete. Alright, so next is to apply the chin and the neck muscles, where I had base coated those black to cover up the silver background. And by applying that black base coat, it just darkens the paint that I put over it. I don't have to work as hard to cover it up. I'm just using a small brush to create little striations where the muscle tissue would be, where that skin had been peeled away. I'm using 2 different colors here, permanent alizarin crimson as well as cadmium red hue, in different layers to apply just a texture, so that when the epoxy goes over it, it just gives a simulation of muscle tissue. I also will kind of shade it a little bit of pink right where it goes underneath the skin of the chin there, and also the neck or chin tendon that just goes straight down, and it has a little bit of a yellow hue to it with titanium white. So just apply layers and streaking motions, a little bit of texture involved, just to give the simulation of muscle tissue. where that neck muscle is supposed to come down and go underneath that chin muscle, it's hard to see the variations because the red tones are very similar. So unless you're really looking for that texture, it's hard to tell which direction the muscle is going. So I did add a little bit of titanium white in the corners where that other muscle is going underneath the chin tissue, so that I can come back over it with a little bit of a pink hue, just to kind of give it some variation where it would be going under or still attached to the skin above. That way it's just not all one solid color. It just gives it a little bit of a dimension instead of just being all red, where it'd be kind of flat looking if you weren't looking directly at it for that texture. Alright, with the chin and neck muscles pretty much complete, I go back with a dry brush and apply a little bit more black over just highlighted areas where I want it to be a little bit darker, and add a little bit more texture or glossiness to certain aspects of the hair. This is mainly over the very top parts of the hair where it's kind of raised above the lower parts. That way it just kind of darkens it a little bit more in certain areas, specifically around the front of the hair around the forehead where I hadn't applied as thick of a dry brushing as the back. So I'm just kind of detailing along the way. I end up coming back later and just doing a little bit more fine tuning with some brown wash, just to apply little itty bitty details in those striations that did not get color. I don't want any of the white clay underneath to show through. So taking the time to just nitpick over those small little details really pays off at epoxy time. Alright, so I don't know if it's just me, but anytime I get to pick up a small brush and do some detailed blood work with any kind of paint, it is an absolute blast. So I'm just using a small brush here to work the red alizarin crimson down the tumbler in just like a little drip effect. Not only does it add just a cool aesthetic to the tumbler where that skin is torn, but if you're looking at the tumbler from the front, your eyes don't really find that tearing tissue around the top unless you're looking down on the tumbler or you're drinking from it. So I needed something to really kind of draw the eye up towards that. So when you're looking at the sides of the tumbler from certain sides of it, you'll see that blood drip kind of running down, and that will just naturally draw your eye up towards where that blood is. So it's just a fun aesthetic. It just gives me an excuse to apply a little bit more blood, and it's just really fun. So I'll also come back after this and I will probably add some cadmium red hue just to brighten those tones just a tad around where the tissue is torn towards the lip of the skin. It's really not necessary, but it's just those little fine details that just kind of add a little bit more color and just fresh blood to the darker blood beneath. Alright, so with a little bit of that blood work done, I'm going to move on to the bottom of the tumbler here. This is a blank slate here. I had some difficulty deciding what I wanted to do here. I did know that I wanted a stake to be going through the bottom of the tumbler. Instead of like a visible vertebrae or like a bunch of like gristle or skin, neck tissue, veins and things. I don't want it to be all that nasty. It's supposed to be kind of fun. While also bringing a little bit of creepiness to it. I don't want to go too realistic. I don't want it to like kind of gross people out if somebody were to take this to work or something. So with the stake, I kind of angled the clay, and I'm going to do the same steps that I used on the back of the neck for the stake that's visible. I'm going to apply a black wash. This is pretty thick though. It's not as much of a wash as the other one. And it's getting in those little nooks and crannies that I carved into just like a staked wood effect. And I don't have to be clean with this because I'm going to go back over this the base with some red and black in a moment. So I'm just applying that, and then I'm going to let it dry, and then I'll start doing my burnt umber and raw sienna washes over that to bring up those tones in the wood. And then I will also do the blood drips on there as well, so that it looks like the blood is dripping down off of the cup, off of the wooden stake. So it's kind of different. It's just something that you probably won't look at a whole lot when you're drinking from it, obviously, but it's just really cool because it brings it all together. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of merge or blend the tan skin color from the neck down into the bottom of the tumbler. I'm going to use that tan color as a base to begin applying some texture around the rim of the cup. I didn't want to do as thick a texture as I did around the top of the cup because that's clay, obviously. And the more epoxy that I have on the bottom of the cup, the thicker it's going to be. It's already going to be thick with that the stake coming from the bottom, and that stake is as thick as I want the epoxy to be. But so that does leave me a little bit of wiggle room for some texture. So I'm going to apply some lines of tan, raw sienna, and titanium white mixture in very thick lines around the outside rim of the cup. And then what I'll do is I will come back and I'll apply some alizarin crimson in those striations between the ridges of the paint strokes, so that it also looks like a kind of torn skin effect. Not as gruesome or as 3D as the top of the tumbler, but still very textured. And then when the epoxy is laid over it, it really kind of brings that to life. It's just a really fun effect, so it's not so bland. I'll really thicken it around where the skin is supposed to lay over those muscles there. And then I come back with many layers. So one layer is not going to do it all. I come back multiple times just to apply different thicknesses in different areas. And it's just going to give it a kind of a cool effect. Alright, so here's some of that blood effect. Kind of just rounding off the blood around the chin, just applying a little bit more, just to thicken that up a bit, and then just applying thin lines around that the textured rim right there. I want to apply the next layer of rippled skin from the titanium white and light brown, so that it kind of rolls over the red a little bit, so that the red looks like it's kind of peeking out from underneath the torn skin. So I'm just going to kind of layer these two different colors in, light brown and white, and then the red, until I get the desired effect. So I had an excess of light brown paint from the skin tones already mixed up. Instead of wasting that paint, I'm just going to use that raw sienna and titanium white mixture to base coat the bottom of the tumbler. I just don't like wasting paint, letting it sit on my palette and dry out, being acrylics. I did research a lot of pictures on this type of painting. When you're painting something and you want to go for some realism like this, usually you look up some photos or reference pictures or something. This cup can be pretty gruesome if you let the Google take over, and it kind of takes you down a rabbit hole with reference photos. I don't want this cup to be that gruesome. It's supposed to be a fun horror cup, just kind of something fun to drink out of, but I don't want it to be absolutely, completely gruesome. So I'm not going to paint all of the veins and the cartilage and the spine muscles and all that stuff into the cup. I'm just going to make the very bottom of the cup pretty simple around the wooden stake. I'm just going to use alizarin crimson and some pure black, and I'm going to do a wet on wet blend just to give it a little bit of simulation of gore, and I'm going to let the viewer or the person drinking from it kind of let their mind take it from there. That way the skin's kind of peeling around the outside bottom rim of the cup, but the very center of it is just a dark red mixture. So it's going to be kind of simple, and I'm going to go ahead and work into that now. Alright, so finally getting to this stage here. So this is where I'm going to use that alizarin crimson and the black just to do a wet on wet blend around the bottom of the cup. I went ahead and did the shading on the wooden stake before I did this, and I feel like it gave just a better overall time-lapse effect when those colors came together against that wooden stake. So enjoy this part of the video, and then we'll move on to the very final details. Alright, so one of the very last things for this tumbler are the eyes. I left them a pure black base from the very beginning of this project. So now I'm going to go ahead and start filling in where the eyes are going to be with a dark blue. And then I'm going to kind of work through layered paints just to kind of get a layered effect. So that way they have a little bit of realism to them. But I still want them to look like they're painted. So then I'm going to go ahead and paint them white, a white background all the way around the eyes. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a few layers here just to cover up that black paint. And then I'll come back and I will do a yellow wash, a cadmium yellow wash, just to add a little bit of tint to that titanium white. And that's going to be a wash so that it sits in the bottoms of where the eyelids are. So the water will do the work. I'm going to go ahead and layer that in. It'll turn that white a nice dingy yellow color. And then I will apply some pink tint to the eye ducts and along the eyelids before I go into actually painting the irises. Alright, so here's that yellow wash. And it's a very light wash, and as it dries I might apply a little bit more here and there. That way it just has some variation in the shades and the tints around the eyes, so it's not so uniform. So here I am applying a little bit of that cadmium red and titanium white mixture to apply some pink eye ducts to the eyes and along the eyelids, and I will gradually bring up those tones to where I want them to be by adding a little bit more cadmium red as I go. This creates a pink rim around the eyelids on the whites of the eyes, and I'll come back with a titanium white and yellow wash to soften those edges before I begin on the irises. So it's kind of satisfying to see that pink soften on a wet technique into the eyes. So now this is a very satisfying part of building the eyes out, using titanium white, dark and light blues to apply the irises. I'm just going to go ahead and layer these in a little bit at a time with small, tiny brush strokes until I get the desired kind of effect. You can also use a wet brush to kind of blend those in if they're still wet. But I'm just going to layer these in just to kind of give it some shadow, give it the blue tint that I want. Then I'll go around the outside of the iris, and I'll apply a little bit of just pure black to darken the outsides of the iris before adding or after adding the actual pupil itself. The pupil really brings the eye together, and it kind of makes it feel more uniform with those colors going to the center. Otherwise it kind of looks disjointed for just a few minutes. You can make this any color you want or any shade you want by just applying more colors. So I'm going to kind of work through this first eye, and then I will do the second eye in 500% speed. So like I said, I'm really taking my time with these eyes. You don't have to rush during this process. It's just supposed to be fun. And if you don't like something, just paint over it and start over. Alright, so as I finish up the last eye here, I'm going to go ahead and add the pupil there. And that kind of marks that as complete. Alright, so here's a real-time view of me just looking at the tumbler here, looking for any kind of like small imperfections where the clay may have chipped around the hair or anything that I want to shade or add to it. This is an absolutely beast of a cup to create. It probably took me 3 or 4 months, yet I did take some time off for the clay work to do other projects for customers. This tumbler is for sale on my Etsy shop, and it will stay up until it is sold. So if you do check out my Etsy shop at Byerly Studios and it is not there, you can make a request, but this is probably the most expensive tumbler that I made. It is 100% clay covered, baked, hand painted. Like I said, this video is 500% speed at some points, so it took me days to paint this. It is an absolute amazing piece of art, and I'm so proud of it. So whoever gets this tumbler is going to have an amazing piece of art for a shelf or to drink out of. This is just a kind of what it looks like on the turner after I applied the first layer of epoxy. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It really incentivizes me to make more content. Thanks. Have a good one.